There really isn't anything comparable to the feeling of being tracked down and stalked by an unseen force in your own environment, especially when that environment you're so familiar with is the inky black gloom of nightfall or a never-ending cave system. Let's go ahead and discuss the Gloomstalker Ranger. So today we're taking a look at the spookiest of the ranger subclasses in Dungeons & Dragons. We're going to be diving into what makes them tick, some of the options you can take when making them, as well as how to play one. The Gloomstalker Ranger originally appeared in Xanathar's Guide to Everything in early 5th edition, and it has been a fan favorite ever since. And I'll admit that I refused to jump on the hype train until very recently. Anyway, this type of ranger utilizes the gloomy power of the Shadowfell to stalk and deceive their prey, in addition to setting up devastating ambushes. Scare tactics are the name of the game, and apart from the assassin rogue, there really isn't another player option in D&D that leans so heavily into surprising your enemies, preferably under the cover of pitch black darkness. A quick warning, this subclass is pretty edgy, which might turn a few players off, but underneath the hood there are some amazing mechanics and power to mess around with. The Gloomstalker does look a bit different to how it originally did in Xanathar's, but overall the 2024 PHB gave it some neat improvements. Jumping straight into what this subclass offers, let's take a look at their level 3 features, of which there are 3. Red Ambusher is the primary feature and pretty much the reason you would become a Gloomstalker in the first place. It is essentially 3 features in one, and it allows you to add your wisdom modifier to your initiative rolls, ensuring you go earlier in combat, something that will become a bit of a theme as we look at other options available to take. Then, on the first turn of every combat, your movement speed increases by 10 feet, ensuring you make the best of your opening turn. Finally, it allows you to take a dreadful strike whenever you hit a creature with a weapon attack. The attack deals an extra 2d6 psychic damage, and yes, this works exactly like Smite, so if you crit, then the damage is doubled. You also get to choose when to use this, so you can literally save it for when you do crit, and you can use it a number of times equal to your wisdom modifier. This means you really do have to have a decent wisdom score to take full advantage of this subclass. Then we have one of the weirdest features in the game, Umbral Sight. This gives you 60 feet of dark vision, or add 60 feet if you already have it from another source. On top of that, you are invisible to any creature that uses dark vision to see you. In other words, if it's dark out, nothing short of a source of light, blind sight, or true sight will allow a creature to see you while you're ruining their day. Just to clarify, while invisible, you have advantage on initiative rolls. You can't be targeted by spells or effects that require the user to see you. You have advantage on all attack rolls, and attack rolls made against you have disadvantage. Yeah, this feature is mildly broken. It also affects your allies, so keep that in mind if they need to see you for their own features to work. Lastly, at level 3, you gain access to a list of spells that you always have prepared when you reach certain levels as a ranger. Speaking of those spells, here's the list. You'll notice that there is a definite infiltration theme going on here, but there are also some great combat options. At 3rd level, you get Disguise Self, which can be used to completely change your appearance if you want to blend into a crowd or flat out pretend to be someone else. 5th level gives you Rope Trick, which can be used to create a small extra planar space at the end of a rope that isn't visible to anyone on the outside. This space can hold up to 8 creatures and lasts an hour, so it can be used to take a short rest, or just to hide in complete safety while a threat passes by. At 9th level, you get Fear, which can send hordes of enemies running in terror from you. It's decent. The 13th level addition is Greater Invisibility, and this spell is amazing for combat. You make one creature invisible for a minute. As mentioned before, this just means advantage on attack rolls, which is great. Plus, you can use this in broad daylight. Finally, at 17th level, you get Seeming. This is basically Disguise Self, but it applies to any creature you want in 30 feet, and it lasts 8 hours. You can also force this upon people for some really strange and confusing interactions, but it's just a solid spell to have. Moving on, let's cover the 7th and 15th level features together. We've skipped one in the middle, but don't worry, we'll get back to it. Iron Mind is the 7th level feature, and it gives you proficiency in wisdom saving throws, or your choice of either intelligence or charisma saves if you already have proficiency in wisdom saves from another source. This is a very solid defensive feature as it allows you to better resist some of the scary effects in the game such as mind control. Everyone is scared of a scenario in which the party barbarian becomes a mind puppet, but trust me, it's just as bad when the invisible Gloomstalker who can launch arrows from 600 feet away is the one to turn on the party. Iron Mind helps avoid this scenario from becoming a reality. Then at 15th level we get the technical capstone, Shadowy Dodge. This allows you to take a reaction when someone tries to hit you with an attack and impose disadvantage on the roll. Then immediately after the attack hits or misses, you can teleport up to 30 feet away. This is actually really strong, and because there is no cap on how many times you can take this reaction, you can keep doing it turn after turn. Okay, in my opinion, level 11 is the unofficial capstone level for ranger subclasses. Almost every 15th level ranger feature is a defensive option, which is great, but not hugely exciting. Conversely, every 11th level feature for ranger subclasses is an option that adds power, usually in the damage department. So what do Gloomstalkers get at level 11? Stalker's Flurry. This improves your dreadful strikes so that they now deal 2d8 psychic damage. Additionally, each time you make a dreadful strike, one of two things happens. You can either choose to immediately make an extra attack against another target within 5 feet of your original target, or you can cause every creature within 10 feet of the target, including the target, to make a wisdom save or become frightened for a moment. The cleave or volley attack is great and does actually stack with any weapon that has the cleave mastery on it. So opening up on a huddled group of enemies with a massive great axe is definitely a thing that you can do. But the fear option is also amazing for shutting down a group of enemies for a turn. Just keep in mind that there is a bit of an anti-synergy here. Frightened creatures can never willingly move closer to the source of their fear, but if they can't see you, then they don't get the disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks. And this is where I remind you that as a Gloomstalker, most things can't actually see you in the dark. Let's quickly cover a few general things to keep in mind when making or playing a ranger. Hunter's Mark is now a core part of how the class functions, and it interacts with a few features. This is a good and a bad thing because it generally makes you deal a lot of damage, but at the same time it eats your concentration and cuts you off from a lot of interesting spell options, particularly if you have access to spells that don't appear on the ranger spell list. On top of that, you gain access to weapon mastery, which allows your choice of favorite people opener to give you some saucy effects in combat. I mentioned cleave earlier, but the slow or push properties from the longbow or heavy crossbow make you a menace to actually get to. Then we need to acknowledge that rangers are just great at being adventurers. They get some expertise so they can specialize in a few skills, and they are fantastic at exploration. Getting access to a swimming and climbing speed might not sound like much, but you'd be surprised how many times something as simple as a cliff face or body of water can hamstring a party's movement. Additionally, rangers are one of the only player options in the game that can get rid of exhaustion during a short rest. It's often overlooked, but rangers are absolute units when it comes to getting around. Finally, rangers are half-casters and have access to an altered version of the druid spell list. Their natural magic is generally centered around utility and ranged combat, but we'll cover that in a bit. There are 4 main ways to play a Gloomstalker. You can go ranged and use a bow or crossbow, or any ranged weapon for that matter. You can go melee and use either a big weapon like a great axe or 2 smaller weapons like scimitars. Or if you're feeling spicy and want to pump your wisdom to the sky, you can take the Shillelagh cantrip from the druid spell list via the druidic warrior fighting style or magic initiate origin feat and use a club or quarterstaff, which will end up dealing as much damage as a greatsword but will let you use a shield as well. Each option has its benefits and will influence what feats you might choose to take, as well as what spells you use. Generally, if you want to use a two-handed weapon, then Great Weapon Master is a good fit. This includes longbows and heavy crossbows despite it being a melee-focused feat, so consider taking it if either of those two weapons float your boat. Crossbow Expert is essential if you want to use any form of crossbow effectively, as you cannot make more than one attack per action without this feat. Considering you have access to extra attack, this feat is a no-brainer. Interestingly enough, this also lets you dual-wield hand crossbows, which does some great damage with Hunter's Mark. Dual-wielder can be combined with a nick weapon like a scimitar to do 2 additional attacks while dual-wielding, which is once again very competitive damage with Hunter's Mark involved. Further than that, Skulker is a decent option if you want to use a lot of stealth. Shadow Touched gives you access to more Shadowfell-themed spells like invisibility, something you wouldn't normally have access to. And then, of course, Crusher, Piercer, and Slasher give some nice benefits if you have a favorite type of mundane damage. Piercer is probably the best considering you will get a lot of advantage with all your subclass features, which means more crits and Piercer gives extra dice on a crit. For origin feats, there is only one serious choice. Alert makes you better at initiative rolls, and that stacks with your Dread Ambusher bonus. Swapping initiative positions is also fun. However, if you don't want to take the druidic fighting style, but you still want access to Shillelagh, then Magic Initiate using the druid spell list is a good option too. Let's quickly swing back to the Ranger spells. Overall, there's a lot to like here. The Ranger spell list is stacked with solid utility options, and there are a few damage-oriented picks too. I will say that it is kind of annoying that most of the Ranger-specific spells don't interact with melee builds. but I suppose they wanted to differentiate the ranger and paladin somewhat, because the paladin class has the same issue but in reverse. They don't make good ranged builds. But we should keep in mind that Gloomstalkers make decent casters when compared to other ranger subclasses. You're incentivized to have high wisdom, and so any spell that has a saving throw will just be stronger. Lastly, I'll say it, Hunter's Mark takes up your concentration and can block you out from using better concentration spells. However, a few of the spells that used to require concentration now don't, and that's nice. For a few quick examples, we have Cure Wounds and Revivify as support spells. Fog Cloud and Silence are great environmental utility. Longstrider, Freedom of Movement, Water Breathing, and Water Walking all lean into the ranger's monopoly on natural exploration. Conjure Barrage and Conjure Volley are two actual blasting spells that deal reasonable damage, albeit at a later stage than a full caster would be able to. And then Hail of Thorns and Lightning Arrow are two more damage dealing spells that trigger off of ranged attacks and can clear some weaker horde type enemies. Okay, so for species options, you can do literally whatever you want, but I just want to highlight two amazing options for Gloomstalkers, and they can both be found in Mordenkainen Presents Monsters of the Multiverse. Firstly, goblins are severely underrated. They have dark vision and are resistant to the charmed condition. The change to heavy weapons means that they can now use longbows, heavy crossbows, or big two-handers despite their small size. They can also use Fury of the Small to deal extra damage to anything larger than them, which is like at least 90% of everything in the game. But most notably, goblins can take the hide or disengage actions as a bonus action, which makes them surprisingly difficult to pin down, especially if you go with a melee build. Then we have bugbears, and I believe that they are the strongest option for a Gloomstalker. They have dark vision as well and are also resistant to the charmed condition just like their goblin cousins, but they are also good at carrying, pushing, pulling, dragging, and lifting things. They come with a stealth skill locked in, and they can fit inside any space a small-sized creature could, which is kind of spooky when you realize that they are usually 6 to 7 feet tall. Their long furry noodle arms also give them extra reach with melee weapons. However, the best thing about bugbears is that they deal an extra 2d6 damage whenever they hit a creature that hasn't taken a turn in combat yet. This makes them the best ambusher, bar none. The fact that Gloomstalkers get better initiative rolls already helps make this happen even more often. If you are a bugbear Gloomstalker, the alert feat is an auto-include. Sorry. I may be biased, but Goblinkin are amazing and you should play one. To round things off, let's quickly discuss a few multi-class options that pair nicely with a Gloomstalker. It's no secret that rangers don't scale very well beyond level 11, and the Gloomstalker is no exception. So, if you're going any higher than that, why not spend your levels elsewhere? A classic combination is Assassin Rogue and Gloomstalker. The two subclasses mesh incredibly well as they both support the I go first every single time playstyle. All of the other benefits from the Rogue class are also great. Sneak attack means you will slap in combat, especially on the first turn. Taking 2 or 3 levels of Fighter is also a really good option for Gloomstalkers. 2 levels of Fighter gives you Action Surge, which can double your attacks on a single turn, which will probably end up being the first turn. But at 3rd level, you get a subclass, and there are a lot of crazy options like the Champion for more crits, the Battlemaster for more control and damage, the Arcane Archer if you're rocking a longbow for the bursting arrow damage, and the Echo Knight which gives you a shadowy buddy and an extra attack, which is pretty thematic. Taking levels in Monk can be deadly. The unarmed strikes and superior movement is great, but if you take 3 levels as a Shadow Monk, you can cast the Darkness spell. When you do so, you can see through it and you can move it, which can break the game. Then, a sleeper pick is 3 levels of War Domain Cleric. They can make an extra attack as a bonus action, and this scales with your Wisdom, which you should have plenty of. They also get some great Cleric spells and spell slots, something you will appreciate more than you think as a Ranger. Anyway, that's the Gloomstalker for you. If you've made it this far in the video, you're great and I really appreciate you. Like I said, I did not like this subclass back in the day, and I thought it was kind of overrated, but I've warmed up to it. It's still not the strongest ranger, but the new changes make it more interesting than most of the other subclasses. So, how would you build a Gloomstalker? Personally, I think a sneaky goblin with a great axe is awesome and hilarious, but that's just me. But yeah, that'll do it for this one. Cheers.